Concerning the economically unstable times that we live in, it is a great idea to convert some of your savings into real money. Now, there is a big difference between real money and what we call money, which is actually just currency. So our dollar is currency, which fluctuates. Real money, on the other hand, like silver, for example, is a store of value over time. The best way to think of it is like this. If you had saved $1,000 in cash back in the late 60s, the late 1960s, that $1,000 would still be $1,000 technically, but it would buy you significantly less today due to inflation. Now, if you had saved that same $1,000 in silver back in the 1960s, today it would be worth around $28,000. So one of the best ways to protect your purchasing power is in real money, more specifically, silver. You can buy and have the metal shipped discreetly to your door, and what most people don't know is that you can actually convert your IRA or even a 401k into physical silver rather than having all of your life savings tied up in the paper fiat system, which is subject to hyperinflation. Go to dailyrenegade.com and click on the Cornerstone Assets Metals banner. This is the only company that I personally trust with this kind of thing. Click on that and sign up to get your free silver report today. One of the financial experts will speak with you to find out the best way to protect your savings going forward in these uncertain times.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Sharpening Report, and I am your host, Josh Peck. So, sorry about the past couple of videos. The audio kind of got wonky, but I think that we've been able to fix that. So, let me know in the comments if the audio sounds better. Today, we're going to be talking about a topic that definitely, if I put up the entire video on YouTube, it would get taken down. And which is really unfortunate because this topic is probably the most important thing we could be talking about on this side of eternity, especially in our own country. And it's something I haven't talked about in a little while. So I thought it would be good to revisit it as best as we can on YouTube, and then definitely go to dailyrenegade.com to get the rest of the show, which that will have more of the stuff that we just can't put on YouTube. And a lot of this information comes from a movie that I did a few years ago called Silent Cry. And it's a very timely topic. It's something that desperately we need more people talking about. But unfortunately, a lot of these social media companies just shuts down the conversation. They delete videos, they'll delete posts or shadow ban. And that's happened to me. I've had entire videos, channels pulled down because of this topic, which is what led to the creation of Daily Renegade in the first place. But Daily Renegade was created for exactly this type of thing. So we can talk about whatever we want and not have to worry about censorship. So that website again is dailyrenegade.com. I highly suggest that you go and view this video over there because you're going to hear a lot more that just can't be put on YouTube or anywhere else. So, and again, it is a membership, so it's just $10 a month, or if you can do it, there's a $100 a year option, and I highly suggest that one because you essentially get 2 months for free. So, if there's anybody there that's not familiar with the movie, it broadly, and I'm gonna in this first part of this video that goes up on YouTube, I'm going to have to be careful how I word things, so you might have to just, you'll know what I mean. But then in the second part, I'll be able to be a lot more free with how I say things. So it deals with, Silent Cry was a movie that I did that deals with a certain type of abuse towards children and trafficking. But it's not a typical trafficking documentary because I've seen a bunch of those, and every single one that I've seen, they leave out the spiritual side of all this. What demonic force is driving this type of behavior? And a lot of that stuff we're going to have to talk about in the second part of the video because there is a whole occult thing going on here. But Trafficking is happening everywhere in America because largely it's being ignored, which is really unfortunate. And the only, the people that suffer for that are the children. But it really goes deeper because there's a rampant occultism that's tied in with trafficking. And this is the thing almost nobody talks about because almost nobody is allowed to talk about it. We're not allowed to discuss this stuff on social media. It just gets shadow banned, flagged, deleted. Anything they can do. So it's not, I don't focus on the like unsubstantiated conspiracy theory and wild claims. Now I know there is stuff that happens and we are going to be talking about that, but I would not put that in the realm of conspiracy theory because a lot of it is, I mean, it's factual stuff. So there are other areas that I don't, if I couldn't corroborate something, then I don't put it in because I mean the sensationalism around this topic really doesn't help either, because all it does is it takes the focus off what should be the focus, which is the children. So Silent Cry, it really went where no other documentary even today has gone before in showing the truth of trafficking of children from experts who have seen and experienced it firsthand. So I was really selective on who I invited to be in the movie because I wanted real experts actively working in the field today and not just someone with an unqualified opinion. So to ensure everything in the movie is accurate, there were only 7 guests. I originally had 12, but due to travel restrictions at the time, we weren't able to include everybody, but we do have available audio interviews with guests that weren't able to be in the film, including Russ Dizdar, the late Russ Dizdar, Greg Reed, William Ramsey, and many more. And I believe that is still available, all of that, at skywatchtvstore.com. But so the people that we do have in the movie, we have Jaco Booyens. He directed and produced the feature film 8 Days to raise awareness for the reality of trafficking in the United States. And he's the founder of Share Together, which is a non-profit organization fighting against the global crisis of trafficking. Alanka Deaton, that is a survivor of trafficking, and she tells her whole story in the film. She's also the sister to Jaco Booyens, and her story is amazing and phenomenal. David Heavener, he's a producer, actor, musician, filmmaker, and he speaks openly about trafficking and situations that he's seen firsthand in association with Hollywood. And he works with victims of trafficking and SRA. And I probably shouldn't say exactly what SRA is until the second half. Most of you watching probably already know, but we will be talking about that in the second half. Stephen Bancars, he is an investigative researcher into trafficking and Satanism. And before becoming a Christian, he was one of the most well-known voices in the New Age movement. Thomas Dunn, a filmmaker and director of Detestable, is an advocate for victims of satanic ritual abuse, and he works with other experts to assist people coming out of SRA. And I did just say it, and hopefully YouTube will just work with me and allow that to be in there. And he helps them adjust to a normal life. And then we also have Joe Horn and Tom Horn from Skywatch TV, which many of you know. The late Tom Horn, he was the CEO of Skywatch TV and ran Whispering Ponies Ranch alongside his wife Nita to bring healing to children victims of trafficking. And he worked to educate families about the dangers and unfortunate frequency of trafficking of children. And he's the author of the book Shadowland, which inspired parts of Silent Cry. It was also narrated by John B. Wells, who has obviously one of the most recognizable voices in America and hosts Caravan to Midnight. And then Derek Gilbert also narrates part 1 of the movie. And you guys know him from this show and from Skywatch TV and other places. So the first thing in the movie, I got fruit flies in my house, but the first thing in the movie that I dealt with was the case of the Finders. And I'm not sure if you have heard about this, but the way that the Finders case was handled, it shows us how, many people think that we should look to the government to solve this trafficking problem. But we have examples like this showing the government has actually been complicit in covering up and even in some cases perpetrating this crime, even going back decades. So the Finders case is one of the best examples of this. In 2018 and 2019, the FBI declassified nearly 650 heavily redacted pages relating to a group known as the Finders, which contains evidence that the State Department and CIA was, again, at best, complicit, at worst, directly involved, and conspired to cover up investigation and charges. So the official story was that the Finders was a post-hippie commune of off-the-grid futurists, that they were discovered in 1987 in Tallahassee when a woman saw 6 malnourished children with 2 well-dressed men at a park, but something didn't seem right about the situation, so she called the police. And 2 weeks after the call was made, the entire case was dropped and largely forgotten until the documents were released, and now we see the official story at the time was completely fabricated. So there is a lot we don't know because, again, what was released is still heavily redacted. But from what we can piece together just based on what the documents say, we can actually show that there was definitely some kind of cover-up and possibly direct involvement going on here. So we do tell the whole story in the movie, but we can hit some of the highlights here. So the police brought the 2 men and children into custody. The 2 men were uncooperative. They did not provide ID for themselves or for the children and were unable to prove that the children belonged to them. While they were in custody, it was discovered there was another Finders case in Washington, D.C. So police had searched properties belonging to the Finders and found hand-drawn pentagrams, over 100 animal bones, and other undisclosed pieces of evidence of satanic/cult rituals. They also found cages that witnesses said were used to keep children in during their visits. They discovered documents on the Finders' property containing instructions for obtaining children, impregnating women, and purchasing, kidnapping, and trading children. The documents expressed a suspicion that the Finders group was being used by the U.S. government on a state and federal level. And a member of the Finders, named Isabella, was discovered to have worked for the U.S. government from 1950 to 1971. And there are investigators mentioned in the documents, though names have been redacted, who became absolutely convinced that the Finders were part of an organized abuse scheme that was being covered up by the State Department and FBI's Foreign Counterintelligence section. So there was proof of abuse that was found in these documents, and it's pretty explicit, and this was discovered before the case was dropped. So they had evidence, and they dropped the case anyway. The police questioned the children that were with the 2 men at the park. The kids described seeing women walking around naked at their home. They described their leader, called the Game Caller, whose real name was Marion Petty. And Petty would tell the kids to do strange things, like read random bulletin boards and take notes, and, more disturbingly, babysit children. During the interview, the children were not well. They were extremely hungry, and they were so sick that they urinated and defecated on the floor. The children were medically examined, and 2 of them, named Max and Mary, were confirmed cases of a certain kind of abuse that I can't say for YouTube. The details and evidence of the abuse are definitely too explicit for YouTube or for this, but it is we do include the full details, including the original offense reporting form in the movie. And again, it's not to be sensational or anything. It's to show this stuff happens. It happened back then. It's happening today, and nothing's being done about it. So the form detailing the abuse from the medical examination has an original date of February 4th, 1987, and a copy was made on February 9th, 1987. on February 18th, so this was 2 weeks after the confirmation of abuse was discovered, the entire case against the finders was dropped. No arrests were made. The two men had all charges against them dropped, and the children were even sent back with no attempts of rehabilitation or even foster care. Nothing like that. So an affidavit written either on or after February 5th of 1987, so this would have been a day or more after the child abuse was discovered, stated that the children were all examined for abuse, but the results were not available at that time, even though we have clear evidence on an offense that an offense report was made at least a day earlier. So someone might think, well, maybe they couldn't get the offense report to them in time. This was before the internet, so maybe it had to be done by mail. But we have to remember this was 1987, so phones definitely existed. But even if that were true, it wouldn't explain why 2 weeks later the whole investigation was called off, because the copy of the report was made 5 days after the original, so it definitely would have been available by then. But it gets even worse. Where the documents explained why it was called off, why no arrests were made and any previous charges were dropped, it actually states that there was no evidence of exploitation, no evidence of kidnapping, abuse, or any related crimes, and no evidence of satanic activity. But now that we have the documents, we can prove that that was an outright lie. It was also reported that the lifestyle choice of the finders was subjective, that there was nothing objectively wrong, abusive, or neglectful, even though the police and medical reports show that they were starved and being withheld medical attention and abused. So after that, all of the evidence was ignored and dismissed without any real answer given. So we know there was at least a cover-up, but why the cover-up is a whole other question. And the best we have in the documents is speculation from someone who appears to have been close to the case, who expressed his suspicions in an official report from the domestic security branch of the police department in D.C. So he wrote that he believed the finders was utilized by the CIA as a disinformation service. He says they are capable of destructive and illegal activities and refers to them as a cult. A cult. He even says he didn't believe the abuse of children was the original plan, but sprung up due to sick and demented people who belonged to this cult. He believed the shaping of the children was a planned experiment, such as the Nazis, towards a perfect society. He also said that he didn't believe the finders ever disbanded, which makes us wonder, are they still active in the government today? Why would it stop? They didn't stop it back then, and apparently they were involved with it. So why would that not be the case today? And when you see, especially things going on at the border and stuff, we get a lot of just horrific accounts of children and what happens to them there. It makes sense that this would only grow and grow and grow, and nothing's being done to stop it. So that also makes us wonder, what horrific levels of corruption are going on in the government now that won't be released for another 30 years. So this shows us, this whole Finders case shows us why we can't trust the government to protect our children. And we, every once in a while we'll get a president that tries to do some things to end trafficking. But, for example, our previous president tried, but that's kind of a fluke, and it's very outside the norm. And one person, even the president, can't fight that by himself. And during his term, we knew that he wasn't going to be president forever, and now we got the guy we got now who's doing nothing about it. And by and large, the establishment, the people who really are in government forever, they at best want nothing to do with this fight, and at worst, and unfortunately in many circumstances, want to perpetuate more trafficking for their own twisted desires. And we've definitely seen examples of that recently, with whistleblowers and stuff coming forth. But this is why the Finders case was covered up, and this is why a lot of things are covered up, such as all of the secret information regarding Jeffrey Epstein. And some of that stuff has come to light, you know, but he and I'll get to him a little later, but I mean, he was allowed to, he was just allowed to be a predator, and it took years to get anything done about it. We'll talk about that in a minute, but there's some pretty horrifying facts about trafficking that most people don't know. So America is actually ranked one of the worst countries for human trafficking, and 1 out of every 4 victims of trafficking are children. So about 500,000 kids are being trafficked per day in America. So at any given time, there's about 500,000 kids out there who are being trafficked. And a child who is trafficked is abused on average 5 to 15 times a day. And only 1% of the crime of trafficking is ever even reported. The average age of girls actively trafficked is 12 to 14, while for boys it's 15, and this is why, especially if you're a parent, this is really important. Now, these numbers are a bit skewed because the average life expectancy of a child who is trafficked is only 7 years. So this means the children who die are not counted in the average age of active trafficking, making the average age appear older. If the average life expectancy of child trafficking victims is 7 years, that means only half survive past 7 years, while half are killed at ages younger than 7. And kids die either just by the violence of the trauma of the crime itself, drugs they're given, sometimes they'll take their own lives, or they'll die alone in the street. And even with adults, much of so-called prostitution isn't even prostitution, it's actually trafficking. Over 98% of global prostitutes are not actually prostitutes, they're trafficking victims. For it to be prostitution, it has to be completely voluntary, meaning if there's any force, fraud, coercion, or if they've ever been abused in any way, or if they're told that they have to do it to pay off a debt, then that's not prostitution, that's trafficking. Now, most assume that the majority of kids in trafficking got into it from a kidnapping. Sometimes children are found through boys and girls clubs or even in church settings. Kidnapping absolutely does happen, but many times traffickers are more clever in their approach to procuring children. Traffickers will use children to recruit other children. Sometimes this means sending them into foster care or child protective services in order to find other kids the traffickers can target. You can literally have 9-year-olds recruiting other 9-year-olds. Sometimes children are sent into schools to recruit other students, and we saw this in the case of Jeffrey Epstein. He and Ghislaine Maxwell would abuse a child, give the child money, and tell that child to go to their school and find other children to bring over. And one of the most horrific things about this is a child can be trafficked without the parents even being aware of what's going on, because kidnapping does not always accompany a child trafficking scenario. A trafficker can pose as a young girl's older boyfriend, then start selling her, but the girl is allowed to return home as if nothing happened. Most times the parents aren't even aware the girl has a boyfriend or anything like this is going on. Parents might just notice the attitude of the child changes, but many times they see that as a normal part of becoming a teenager. So in the film, Yacobuyan says that the child that is most at risk is not a child who lives in a poor neighborhood, because that child likely has seen crime firsthand, so their radar is more up. Instead, he says the child that is most at risk is a middle-class suburban child who is oblivious that kind of thing even happens. A kid who, escapes into a cell phone, whose parents are still together and relatively well off financially, because that child has no radar whatsoever. And along with kids oblivious to these things, kids who are more withdrawn, loners who aren't as social as most, are seen as targets, especially if that child does not have the best relationship with their parents, because then a trafficker can swoop in and play the hero, and that's one way that grooming works. Public school is also very susceptible, because even if a child does not have a cell phone, most likely their friends do. And it is now reported that the average age a child sees pornography for the first time is only 9 years old. And pornography is frequently used to desensitize kids to the idea of what's going to happen to them, so they can become easier targets. Kids who are heavily involved in social media are at risk, as traffickers will use social media in clever ways to fool kids into them making themselves vulnerable. So every social media site is inundated with pornography, and no social media company has a great track record of policing it. We talk about it more in the film, but it's been reported that YouTube, even YouTube Kids, Instagram, Facebook, and many others have already allowed that kind of thing on their platforms and continue to do so. So if your kids are on any social media platforms, they have direct access to this type of content. But there are things that parents can do to help minimize the risk. So first, we need to understand at this time, it's basically impossible to be completely free of any and all risk having to do with trafficking. There are some parents who do everything right, and their child still ends up becoming a target. This is exactly what happened with Ilanka Deaton, and why we included her powerful story in the film. However, there are things we can do to at least lessen the risk, and they revolve around three things: trust, strength, and knowledge. So trust is a huge factor. Parents really need to make sure they're doing everything they can to be trustworthy figures in their kids' lives. Parents need to be beyond reproach. They need to do as little as humanly possible to give their kids an excuse to not trust them. So be clear and consistent in your expectations of your kids. Be completely open and honest, even about your own shortcomings, because believe me, your kids are going to know your shortcomings anyway, and it will go a long way of building trust with them if you don't try and hide or lie about things that you're not perfect at. If you're willing to be open, they will be more willing to be open with you. Strength is also really important. Do not let your kids do whatever they want. You know, love them enough to be the strict parent that doesn't allow them to have free open access to a cell phone, but also explain to them why and what dangers are out there, and how these traffickers absolutely will use their cell phones to target them, which leads to the next big thing parents need. We as parents need to be bold without being brutes, and realize it's more important for our kids to be safe than for them to like everything we're doing or every choice that we make for them. So knowledge is the key. It's so important for parents to be educated and warn their children of the dangers of the world. And many experts are saying there's no real age where they're too young to know. You just talk to them on a level that they can understand. You don't want them to live in constant fear, but you don't want them to be oblivious either. They need to know there are bad people out there, so they can start training their radar to be active at all times. So I'm going to speak specifically to the fathers here, because the large majority of children who are trafficked are girls, although boys are steadily on the rise. Most fathers don't realize the power they have in their daughters' lives. And there's a reason men are told to love their wives like Christ loves the church. We really need to be using Jesus as our example of how to be with our wife and kids. So first off, if there's problems between you and your wife, the kids are going to react to that in ways that you probably won't see immediately. So your relationship with your wife is incredibly important. I mean, imagine how damaged the church can get with a broken relationship with Jesus. That's how important it is. Second, think of all the ways that you love and trust Jesus. Why do you trust him? What kinds of strength does he show you that builds trust with you? How does he educate you and prepare for the dangers of the world? Jesus is our example of how to be with our wife and kids, and that is absolutely not something that husbands and fathers should disrespect or abuse. We need to take that incredibly seriously. Your entire family literally depends on it. So let's talk about Epstein for a little bit, and I want to get into just some background information, and then a lot of the stuff is going to have to is going to have to be talked about in the second part. Sorry about checking my phone. I always got to make sure if it's an emergency or something, just with my son's health and everything. But So just some background information in case if people don't remember, or if you're just not, if you haven't been exposed to this topic yet. So Jeffrey Epstein, he was an extremely wealthy financier, and he was a trafficker. And absolutely, you know, a word I can't use on this side, but he was an absolute P word. Ends in file. I can't say it because YouTube, that might even have been too much. But he had connections with several of the elite, including politicians, entertainers, and influencers. He owned an island allegedly used for certain types of parties, including with children. And he kept records of everyone who visited the island, confirming many high-level names, and a lot of, you know, some of those names have been released. In 2005, he was actually being investigated because a parent said that Epstein had abused her 14-year-old daughter, to which Epstein actually pled guilty, but he was not convicted until 2008, and only for 2 crimes, served only a year in custody with extensive work release, and despite that federal officials had identified 36 girls, some as young as 14, whom Epstein allegedly abused, that's still all he got. So a lot of trauma and abuse could have been prevented if people just did their jobs. So in the past, he had strong cases against him, but the charges never really stuck, showing that our system is broken and cannot be trusted to end trafficking. When the charges finally looked like they were going to stick, he allegedly committed suicide, though, you know, many believe that he was murdered. And there is evidence for that. And I don't know how much of that I can actually talk about on YouTube. You know what? I might have to cut it there. We do have more to get into, so please go to dailyrenegade.com and get the rest of this, because we're going to talk about the suicide murder thing, and it's, I know many of you are familiar with that, so I'm just going to give a brief synopsis on that. But I want to talk about his island and the occult connections there. And there are a lot of occult connections even outside of Epstein and the island that I want to talk about. And there's a lot to talk about there that absolutely cannot go up on YouTube. And certain sacrifices, you know, we need to talk about. We need to talk about the sensationalism around it, how much of it is real, and actually some of it is. And then we'll talk about that there is actually hope here. So, so yeah, I think we're gonna have to cut it here for this video. For people viewing for free on YouTube. So again, if you want the rest of this video where I can actually say things and tell you guys what's going on with this and what we can all do about it, head on over to dailyrenegade.com. Get a membership. It's only it's only $10 a month or $100 a year. If you can do the $100 a year, that's the best deal. And also, just to remind everybody, we got a brand new website, and it's beautiful. It works amazingly. Everybody likes it. And when you log in, you're not only getting access to videos, you're getting access to videos 2 weeks in advance. So if you're viewing this on YouTube right now, members have had this video for 2 weeks now. Not only are you getting that, I'm going to start adding show notes to the videos so you can download and read along the show notes if you want that. But also we have like a social media site kind of embedded right in the website. So it works a lot like Facebook. It's just a community page, and you can post, you can have your own profile picture. It works just like Facebook, and this is a way that we can all talk with each other. And you know, of course, and there's not a big risk of trolling, because I really don't think anybody's going to pay their own money to troll. Trolls are pretty pathetic. They want to do it for free. So that membership, it helps keep the website going. We're also raising funds to get a TV app and a phone app for you guys. And also, well, by the time that people are viewing this on YouTube, this part of it will be outdated. But for everybody viewing it today, because I'm going to upload this today, February 13th, on the website, I'm going to be moving soon, and so we're trying to raise money for that too, because I accepted a job at Prophecy Watchers, which I'm really excited about. And keep us in prayer, because we think we found if we get approved, they got to go through our credit and all that stuff. But if we get approved, we found a house that will work beautifully for us. It's got enough room for us. It's a rental. We're gonna have to start off with a rental, and it's pretty close to the studio. So I mean, it would just be great. So please pray that God finds us a house that He wants us to stay in that will work for everything that we need, and that God finds a person to buy this house, because we really would love to sell this as soon as possible. So keep us in prayer for all that. Okay, so once again, we are gonna call it here for YouTube and Rumble. But again, head on over to dailyrenegade.com, get a subscription, check out our amazing new website, and there you'll be able to get to the rest of this information, the real meat of this video that I can't talk about on YouTube. So for everybody viewing for free, well, Daily Renegade members, all you have to do is hold on the line. You don't have to do anything, but because you're watching it on the website. But for everybody else viewing for free, thank you so much for joining me, and until next time, take care and God bless.